Welcome to dual coding mind mapping for the unit of keeping healthy. You're going to need a blank piece of paper and a pen or pencil. The first part is keeping healthy, and that's the unit we're going to be looking at today. And you can see there's a little diagram. Now what you need to do is copy down everything that you see on the screen whilst listening to the explanations. And at points, what I'd like you to do is to re-talk or re-go through each of those branches, either to yourself or to somebody else. And I'll give you opportunities as we go through the video. The first branch, communicable diseases. Here we have different microorganisms, and we're looking at viruses, bacteria, and fungi. And we also have pathogens, and these are all things which can affect and attack the body systems in different ways. Viruses, for example, they invade your cells and use them as a host. Bacteria multiply every 20 minutes. We'll look at that a bit later on. And then fungi, you have quite common fungi infections are things like athlete's foot. So here are some types of communicable diseases. Now, once you've drawn all that you see on the screen, I'd like you to pause the video and go back through this to talking to yourself or talking to somebody else. Our second branch is a plasmodium, and here we're looking at malaria and mosquitoes. Now, mosquitoes, when they bite a human, they infect the human in the bloodstream. And what happens is the plasmodium attaches to the red blood cells, and it uses the bloodstream like a transport system, like a train. And so it travels around the body in the blood cells, and it goes to the liver, where it divides and it multiplies. It feeds off the liver itself. It then goes back into the bloodstream in the red blood cells and divides more and more, to eventually it makes the red blood cell burst. And when it's burst, it's then released into the bloodstream a lot more. And this is when we get some real problems. This is a really big infection that's taking hold. Again, I'd like you to pause the video, have a go at re-explaining each of those stages to yourself or to a partner, and then start the video again. Now, our next branch we're looking at is bacteria, and here we're looking at how they multiply, how bacterial infection can really take hold and can happen rather quickly. And they multiply every 20 minutes. So you start with 1, and in 20 minutes you then have 2. Another 20 minutes you have 4, and then 8, then 16, then 32, etc., etc. It continues. It goes on and on every 20 minutes. So after a 24-hour period, you can have an awful lot of bacteria in your system. Now, bacterial infections are also things like STIs, sexually transmitted infections. These are things such as chlamydia and HIV. Now, we can prevent these things from happening by using things such as a barrier method, like a condom, to prevent the bacteria being transmitted from person to person. And we can also use medications to treat the infections after. Again, stop the video, re-explain to yourself or to a partner, and then we'll start the video again. The next section we have is immune responses. Our body has a lot of different immune responses. We have things such as platelets in our bloodstream, and platelets allow for our blood to clot. Now, this is really important when we things like cut ourselves. Our body gets we get a scab over the cut because our platelets allow our blood to clot. So if you have a low platelet count, you're not going to clot and you're going to bleed more. So having a good amount of platelets in your bloodstream is really good to stop things like cuts from bleeding. We also fight infections, and we can do this by a number of ways. Now, we have white blood cells in our bloodstream, 2 types of white blood cells, lymphocytes and phagocytes. Now, phagocytes are really important because they engulf bacteria. And so what they will do is they will surround the bacteria and then use digestive enzymes to break it down and to get rid of it. Lymphocytes produce antibodies, and we'll talk about those in a minute. In our lungs, we have things such as ciliated epithelial cells, and they're like little hairs which stand up on end, and they move in a wave-like motion, like a transverse wave, hence the little waves squiggles on the screen. And they have a movement of swish and flick. And what they do is they swish and flick bits of germs, dust, etc. in the lungs which shouldn't be there. Now, these germs and dust are collected by something called mucus, and this is a sticky white substance which acts a bit like a glue or like a putty, which traps all of those germs and dust. And then the ciliated epithelial cells are able to move that mucus along and back out through our throat and out through our mouth. Now, we also have things like antibodies, and antibodies, as I said earlier, are produced by our lymphocytes, a different type of white blood cell in our bloodstream or in our immune system. And these produce antibodies, and they're a particular shape and fight particular infections. And we can also use vaccines to create these antibodies. Now, vaccine is used by inserting a dead or inactive part of that pathogen into our system, and then our body fights it off by producing these antibodies and then remembering, using our memory cells, what these shapes are like. And so we build a resistance, and this helps us to prevent getting any further infections. Again, stop the video and make sure you've got everything copied down, relay or re-explain the information to somebody else or to yourself, and then start the video. In our last section, we have medication, and we can use medication to fight infections as well as our immune responses. Now, we have antiviral drugs, which we can use for viruses, because remember, viruses are different to bacteria. Viruses need a host cell, whereas bacteria don't. And we have antibiotics, which fight against bacteria. Now, it's really important that we understand the difference between viruses and bacteria. A common cold is a virus. The flu is a virus. A chest infection is bacteria. Okay, and that's why we would have antibiotics for a chest infection, but we wouldn't have antibiotics for the common cold or for the flu. Now, just like we can build a resistance to different infections, to different pathogens, so can bacteria. They can build antibiotic resistance, and this happens when we don't take our antibiotics properly. If we don't take the full course of antibiotics, because usually at the 4th or 5th day you start to feel well, and so you don't complete the course, you may get some bacteria which are left behind, and they, just like us, start to become resistant to that antibiotic. They build a resistance to it, and then they start to multiply, and we have the same problem over again, except that this time we can't use the same antibiotics as before because the bacteria are now resistant to it. So we use a different type of antibiotic. Now, if we don't complete the course again, the same thing happens. They build a resistance to that type of antibiotic, and so multiply, and we have the problem again. So it's really important that we take a full course of antibiotics to stop bacteria being able to build a resistance to those antibiotics. Again, I'd like you to pause the video, re-explain that branch to yourself or somebody else, and then play the video again. The next step we're going to do is we've managed to build a really nice, large mind map. We've got a few words and lots of diagrams. And hopefully, with the explanations that we've had and with you re-explaining to somebody else or yourself, you've managed to retain some of that information. Now, what I'd like you to do is to get a blank sheet of paper and look at the mind map which you've created for 3-4 minutes. What I'd then like you to do is turn over that mind map and on your blank sheet of paper, redraw as much as you possibly can. Once you've finished, I want you to compare the two and see how you did. Now, by repeating this every week or every couple of weeks, you will start to remember different bits and pieces. And all the different branches which are on this mind map are each of the key concepts for each of the for this unit of keeping healthy. thank you for listening, and tune in again for a different unit.